upon a time in a month of April, I read these books, so we're going to talk about them. First, we have two books by Vivek Shraya, an incredible author. She writes many different genres, but this one we're going to start with like a fantasy kind of contemporary, and it's called She of the Mountains. It's published in 2014. It's very like magical realism. So we have these interspersing stories about Hindu mythology mixed with also a contemporary story of a boy growing up. And the thing that keeps on being told him is that he is gay. And he's not really sure what this word means because it's like the 80s, 90s, and he's not very familiar with it, but he knows it's an insult. And then as he grows up, he starts to embrace this, and then he also one day falls in love with a woman, and he's like, what does this mean? What does it mean? Because they keep on telling him, like, she's your beard, like, you just really need to get over this heteronormity, like, and he's like, yeah, no, I think I'm bisexual. And it really covers this relationship. It's quite a short book, but it's coming of age and recognizing bisexuality and recognizing all of these things. And it's really well. I gave it 4 stars. It's Canadian. It's lovely. One of the things that I love in the end, though, is that he's talking about the fact that, like, his insecurities and stuff like that. And I'm saying he because the narrator is never identified, which is one of my favorite tropes ever. I think, like, I really love when that is done. So we have this story, and throughout, he eventually says, like, I like my body when I'm with you, talking to his girlfriend. And then later on, he says, I want to love my body when I'm not with you. It's really about learning to have a relationship that upholds you and that encourages you, but then also learning to separate yourself from that relationship. Sometimes you can remain in a relationship and learn and have body positivity and have self-esteem, but sometimes you also need to get out of a relationship to really have the experiences that will help you become yourself and will help you to really find your security in yourself and not dependent on a partner. I'm Afraid of Men was published about a year after she transitioned, and it's really about feminism, about being a trans woman and what it means to be that. It's about how toxic masculinity affected her when she was presenting as a man or a boy growing up, and then also, and it is so powerful. It is a really wonderful job of really talking about these really important subjects around sexual assault and around boundaries. We have Disappearing Moon Cafe, and this is by Sky Lee. And she is again Canadian because I was on a Canadian hit this month, and I really adored her work. So if we're going to compare it to books, because I think that sometimes that can really work, it has some aspect of like 100 Years of Solitude with following a family, but it also has some aspects of like City of Girls or a little bit lesser like Evelyn Hugo, because it really covers the family over the time and their coming of age and figuring out secrets and stories and pasts, and I really, really love it. It does deal with incest, and I think that that's a good warning to show, but unlike things like 100 Years of Solitude, which I did not love for that reason, it does not romanticize it. It's really about the fact that people are having affairs, but they're so struck on the idea of like morality and secrets and being honorful that they're not actually being truthful about whose children are whose children, so that people don't know when they're like, yeah, this is just a dude. No, that's your brother, and your parents aren't going to tell you that, even after they tell you you can't marry him for no apparent reason. So I really love the exploration it deals with, like through, you know, the gold rush from like the 1890s and the railroad, and how like Canadian government like immigrated a bunch of Asian workers, specifically Chinese people, to work in terrible, terrible conditions. And it follows throughout the 20th century and looks at the different decades, and especially looks at the women, and I think that is lovely. And it ends in 1990, which is actually when it's published. So this is quite an old book, but it has a quite modern look at feminism and at identity and all of these things. Apparently we are reading by pairs this month because I read another 2 books that were by the same author back to back, and I can't pronounce her name very well, so I pull it on screen because I've tried like so many takes and I butcher it every single time that I feel terrible. I'm very dyslexic. But this is by Leanne Bet B. Simpson. We're gonna go with that. And the first one is Islands of Colonial Love, and this is some poetry, autofiction, short stories, and this didn't really work for me because I thought that the characters were very, very disconnected. It does do a lot with Indigenous representation, and I think that's important, but just the style really didn't work for me, and that doesn't mean that it's not a good book or that other people won't enjoy it. It is like acclaimed in Canada, and I'm like, I was reading it and I was like, you know what, I really want to love this author and I really want to so I'm gonna read some of her older books and see like the development and stuff like that. Actually, this is a later book, so I was like, maybe she's become more personal or more open in her later books, and she definitely did, and it didn't work for me for the same reason, and I feel so terrible. So this is Accidents of Being Lost by the same author, and this, it does deal more and has more poetry aspect to it, and it's very personal, but it also has such a fixation on this one woman. And like, she's married and everything, but like, she is very obsessed. She's like, I'm gonna text her drive because she hasn't messaged me in 6 minutes. And I was like, you are a 40-year-old woman. I can't. I know that we're not supposed to make moral judgments, but like, to me, it just became the thing that I was just like, I know, I just, I can't, I can't do it, okay? But I do think that many of these poetry collections, short stories, mix of both of like autofiction and fiction and all of those things and real life are really important stories, and they're very short and they're very lovely written. I just, because of the fact that one felt very, very distant and very disconnected, and one felt hyper focused, that I just really struggled, and I'm so sorry. So the next book is Lola Woods by Carmen Mercado Machado, and I love this book. I have a whole review like waxing on about how much I adore this book. It has such great representation for sexual assault, using horror tropes to really talk about sexual assault in such an evocative way without actually ever representing it. I am going to plug another video because I just filmed that video, but it's called Recommending Songs Based on Billie Eilish Songs, and because I recommended this based on Seeing Your Power, which also shows Billie talking about sexual assault while having a snake going around like her legs and then breasts and then neck and like strangling her, and it's a really evocative way of showing this while also not re-traumatizing people, and I think that that did so well. It had horror tropes, it had some fantasy tropes, but it had a similar aspect of talking about these really important topics without making it exploitative, and I think that that was so well done. If you want to know, I have a review about it where I talk about it and I compare to it real life, like women's talking and stuff like that. It's an excellent book. Another book I really, really loved in Canadian, because we're just hammering the Canadian things, because I love reading books where I see myself in and I see the places I know and all of that. So we have Runaway, short stories by Alice Munro. She is very, very acclaimed in Canada. I think she's won a Pulitzer Prize and like pretty much every prize she possibly could for one of her works, and she is a very elderly woman. Her and Margaret Atwood are holding up the like 80s plus women who are just rocking literary work still, and I adore her. I adore this collection. It was so well done. It has some similar aspects to like Shirley Jackson and like things like that, really uncovering the veneer beneath popular culture. And she's credited with creating this kind of sub-genre of South Ontario like Gothic, which is kind of like Southern Gothic, but we're South Ontario, so we'll own that. And I live in this region, and it many people say that it's not really a subgenre because it doesn't have any horror, it doesn't have any actual unique things from contemporary things, but I think the theme of it or the purpose of it is distinct. And we have like people talking about abuse, we have people talking about growing up and age and relationships and identity, and really like negotiating with the way that you look at the world. And I thought it was stellar. It looks at women from across the 20th century. One of my favorites is that there's 3 collections from a girl who is young, and she has it again very like Shirley Jackson-esque heroine thing from her short stories, which probably most people haven't read, so I shouldn't reference, but like one of my favorite books, so I will. And you know, she's coming of this and she's really trying to find herself, and she's dealing with sexism in academia and her meeting a man. And then we have her in middle aged and what that looks like as she deals with the death of her mother and her daughter being young and stuff like that. And then we deal with her throughout the later life and how that has, she's been disconnected from her daughter, and really mirroring what it looks like. And I love being able to see people throughout generations and throughout years and how they develop, and I think this was such a well done. It also shows such a great one from like the 50s until probably like the 90s, and I really enjoyed the exploration. Sadly, I also started another collection by her, and it is called View from Castle Rock, and it was actually her next collection after, and I was a little hesitancy after learning that it is historical fiction set in 1700s Scotland, which I was like, not really my favorite. I love following things, but I need it to be a little bit more deeper than that. And she really reconstructed this from her own records of her family, and I think that that's so cool for her. It was so boring, and it didn't, like, maybe I just don't care about the themes as well explored in like pioneer times, but it's just, it's not mine. And of course, it doesn't have the greatest language while talking about indigenous people and stuff like that. And I do hope to read more of her books in the future. I actually bought one of hers this month, but that was a DNF for me. We also have a trilogy of books by John Ridley, who is an Oscar winner for his screenplay, 12 Years a Slave, which is a book that I thought was phenomenally well done and have not watched the movie, so I need to watch it because this was incredible. These are graphic novels, but they are like much more graphic novels than comics, but we're looking at the history of the DC universe, and it's called The Other History of the DC Universe, and it really looks at people of color and marginalized superheroes that don't ever get their name in the sun. And I thought it was so well done. We start with Black Lightning and we follow his story in the 60s and the 70s, and it was just so incredibly done. Like, this was a 5-star book, which does not happen very often, especially I think comics, I don't know. I love comics, and I've been reading lots of comics. And then we have followed the next one, which is A Dual Perspective by Karen Beecher Bumblebee and Mal Duncan, known by many things including Guardian. And I have vlogs going over it, and it's not like high-key vlogs or anything like that. It's just me going through and like looking at the things and reading them, and someone said I have an audiobook voice, which, so just do that because apparently I read very nicely. Best compliment ever. Anyways, I thought this was so well done, and I really appreciated the way that it talked about tackle like really specific things, and it talks about the social issues that were going on and incorporating that with fiction. And I think that's historical fiction has that talent. It has that ability to be able to talk about these really important subjects, but in a way of history, so that we can really aspect what it is and comparing their lives to how it interacts with the social issues of the day, and especially the civil rights movement and things like that. And then the third book was about Katana, and I did not think that this was the best one. I think that they really should have got an Asian writer for this, because John Ridley talks about these important things. He talks about, you know, the abuse against Asian Americans and all of this, but I also know that it felt like there was a space between us and the reader. It really felt like we weren't seeing Tatsu's thoughts. We were really seeing John Ridley talk about Tatsu's thoughts. And it disappointed me, but I think that, yeah, it was still a good collection, and I learned a lot about Tatsu, but I didn't learn enough about her from her own point of view, and maybe that's just a part of her character that I didn't understand. But I really think that was, like, Mal was definitely a little bit more reserved, so was Jefferson, and yet we still saw their point of view so evocative. So yeah, I was disappointed in this. But we do have 2 more collections which are upcoming in 2021. One follows Renee Montoya, who I read her first collection where really in Gotham Central, where she becomes one of the first lesbians in DC Comics, and her story as a police captain and police detective and all of this, and so I'm interested to see how he reimagines them. I've also seen the Batman animated series where it was her first introduction and stuff like that. So she is a Latinx lesbian, and this is very important to her story. She becomes a superhero later on. So I'm interested to see about what we go here. And then very excited because the last issue is about Anissa Pierce, and she is a lesbian black hero, and she's the daughter of Jefferson Pierce, which was issue 1. So we're really going to see the story go full century into the 20th century, 21st century, and all of that. So I'm excited for those that are upcoming in end of May and July. I continued on the graphic novel journey, including most notably March Volume 1 by James Lewis, and he is a very renowned civil rights activist. He was 23 on the March of Washington, which he helped create and organize, and he spoke third, I think, to Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream 8th. So like super cool, super awesome, and this really is his memoir and experience of civil rights. And he wrote in graphic novels, which I think is wonderful. It's actually taught in like some college things and stuff like that, and I think it's a really good way to have an accessible way to talk about civil rights, to talk about biography, to talk about memoir in a way that is, you know, isn't necessarily aimed at children, because it does have some pejoratives and some like things that you know, obviously is people's reality, but very harsh. But it's available to all ages in a way that does not scrimp away from the trauma and stuff like that. So we really begin with him on his march, and then we start with looking back at his childhood and also interspicing him talking to children on the day of Barack Obama's election. And I think that this is very well done. It talks about his childhood for a very long time, which I didn't expect, but it really sets up who he is as a man, who he is as a person, and why he values things, why he values education. The fact that he ran away from his parents who wanted him to work in like field so that he could like go on the bus. Like, he didn't run away from them. Like, he would like hide and then like just dart onto the bus because he was like, I must learn school. Which I understand that kind of that kind of, you know, thoughts. It's great. And yeah, we really learn about his early things, about the sit downs in Alabama and all of that, and it's really well done. I'm really excited to read both volume 2 and volume 3, and I'll probably do a review of all 3 of them when I am done all of them. Then we have 2 stars to Shang-Chi and the 10 Rings. That is a novel name. This is something else which I did not write down the full name, and I did really enjoy this. I thought that it was interesting at the beginning, and this is really the origin and his first solo series of the hero that will be coming to your screens in September of 2021. God willing that we do not have another delay, because Marvel's delays on movies is making me slightly frustrating. Yeah, I have a video that talks about my hype versus things that are upcoming, and it was great because I read this and then the trailer dropped like the next day, and I was like, wow, this is awesome. So yeah, it really follows his story, his backstory with his father that has been changed for the movie, you know, his siblings and where his origin is. I thought that the opening shots and his introduction was pretty good. I thought that we got some muddled in the middle, but I'm interested to see where he goes in the future, and especially seeing an adaptation of him as well. Talking about some highs and lows, we have Truth and Justice Volume 3. I really love the first 2 volumes. We had one about Vixen and then one about Superman, which specifically did with black violence, and him really working as a journalist to expose people and to expose plans and to represent what it means to be a person. And I really love that aspect of Superman because he really is someone who, depending on the interpretation and depending on how things have changed throughout the years, is an immigrant. He is an alien, and not only as, you know, it makes sense that he would care about undocumented people, that he would care about immigrants and things like that, because that is a part of his story. He was made by immigrants to have a story that he is American and he is accepted, but he's also a person from somewhere else, and he will always struggle with that. And he will also want to stay true to both his Kryptonian and to his American identity. And I think that that's really important. So I loved that we had that book, even though it finished in a way that wasn't completely satisfactory. However, then we move on to Constantine, and this was just a wreck of a comic. I don't know the purpose. It was 3 issues. It was like, it read in all of the bad ways that fan fiction is sometimes one. I don't read fan fiction, but I respect people who read it and write it. I think that it can be really well done, even though I don't enjoy it because I do love canon a little bit too much, probably. Except for when it comes to shipping, I will ship everyone today. But this is like just banter all the time, and it is like a story, and it's like, it's really about truth and justice, and I don't know how this really talks about social issues in the way that the first 2 did. It's really just like, I'm gonna control this person who is non-binary, and that's really important, but after that it's like not about them at all. We just shift completely to him flirting and then telling stories and all of these things, and it's like, let's talk about the 1920s and this like seance and how things ended up, and I'm gonna take your powers and be like, yeah, no, you're probably gonna hate me, because he needs to stay in bad boy territory. And it's just, it was so cringy, so not good. And I know this is an anthology series for a lot of like new art authors and stuff like that, and the author themselves is non-binary, and that's cool, and I hope they write great things in the future, because this was a train wreck. Then we have Infinite Frontier, which was lovely. I don't know exactly what this is. Infinite Frontier is like DC's new thing, and I don't understand their canon and everything like this, but it's like omniverse, everything is present, everything is infinite. So this tells an alternative story of a black Superman who is named Kelvin Ellis, which Kal-El. Anyways, and he's the president, not only Superman, but the president. This was actually created in 2009 to really represent Barack Obama, which I think is super cool. After Obama came out of presidency, and I learned a lot about like Michelle Obama becoming a great book, stuff like that, I became a fanboy of Obama, which I never was or knew much about him because I was a teenager in another country when he was president. But this is really cool. So this is like their ode to him, and now he's getting a different future and stuff like that, and I really love the take on this. It was like only like 30 pages or so like that, but I'm very excited, and I really hope we get more stories. Like, I'm not really sure if this is just pitching because we're doing different stories, but I hope we get more, because Kelvin Ellis Superman, also if Michael B. Jordan plays him one day, would make me real happy. So Conversations with Friends is a book that I haven't completely figured out how to talk about because I adore it. Also, I talk very long again in the Billie Eilish video, so feel free to go over there. But this is a book that I read twice in 29 hours. It was incredible. I really love the way that it captured just all of these emotions and miscommunication and conversations about what it means to be young, what it means to be a poet, what it means to have art, and depression and not being able to express yourself, and these complicated relationships with friends and lovers and all of these things. And oh, it is so good. I am becoming a Sally Rooney stan. I also love normal people, but like, fully cemented after this, and I think it's lovely, and I have no way to express it because I loved it so much. I read it twice in 24, like, it was just like, and I was just loving it, and I was like, I could read it a third time. I totally could. And I read terrible beer because of it, because I don't like beer, but I was like, I must drink beer because of this novel, even though it doesn't talk that much about beer. Anyways, moving on, we have Death on the Nile by Agatha Christie. And I've been reading through Agatha Christie, and after this one, like, it was okay. I enjoyed it. I think that I'm not really going to pursue her writing more much. I have A Death of Elephants. That's not one. Dead Man's Folly and Elephants Can Remember on my shelf, and I'll probably read those, and they'll probably be fairly good. Roger Ackroyd is also a book that, like, people love and everyone tells me to read. So yeah, one of my, like, best friends is, like, an Agatha Christie stan. She, like, keeps Agatha Christie in every purse and, like, buys it every time she goes to chapters. And my roommate also is one of her favorite authors. So, like, I will come in contact with her again, but I really, really love Murder on the Orient Express, probably one of my favorite books, and Then There Was Done was extraordinary. But my other forays into her other work, like, it's good, it's just, I'm not a huge mystery person, so that's kind of what I felt like this. I thought it was pretty good, it was entertaining, but it wasn't something that I, like, was on the edge of my seat or loved. So that's my thoughts. It was 3 stars, average, pretty good. Then we have Shadow and Bone. Talking about one of my other best friends, she loves The Dark Lane. Like, I know we all had a crush on Ben Barnes, even though it was mostly Scandal Keynes when I was younger, but she loves this. So she filled my, like, voice messages for days with talking about him. So I watched the show, and then I was like, okay, I'll read the book, it'll be great. I'd always planned to read the book, and then I never got around to it and was like, it's late. I'm not really enjoying fantasy, as you can tell. Fantasy was not really on the shelf unless it's comics. But this was actually pretty good. I was surprised by how much it really worked as a television show. The book, it didn't do much to me. It isn't a bad book. It isn't a good book. I'm excited to get to Six of Crows. I'll probably finish it. I was ready for it to be over by the time it was over. And then we have 3 stars to Batman Year 3. I have been on a Batman kick. I love Batman. And this also goes with A Lonely Place of the Dying, which was my next book. I gave both 3 stars, and I really enjoyed it. These are 1989, 1990 comics, and I had a bad time reading Death of a Family that deals with Jason Todd's death. So this one, I was kind of eerie going into it, but Jason Todd was the Robin after Dick Grayson, who was the original Robin. And I'm sorry if you don't know Batman, but we're gonna be quick on this. So pretty much the thing is that, you know, he had grown up, and that's something that hadn't happened to a lot of comic books. But we wanted Batman and Robin as a dynamic duo, so you introduced Robin and a new Robin named Jason, and then they made a carbon copy, and it was terrible. So then a crisis happened, and they remade him again, and this time we had him as, like, a tough boy. He smokes, and he's 13, and he steals tires from the Batmobile, which is a hardcore move. I have to say, it's a move. Be like, that's a Batmobile, I'm gonna steal the tires. I didn't know the tires could come off, and, like, explosives didn't happen. Anyways, and yeah, no one liked him, and they killed him, and it was really unpopular because, you know, they killed a friggin' child, and it was a terrible arc with a lot of, like, Islamophobia, and it was just very uncomfortable. But then I was like, you know what, I want to go into the Tim Drake, who's the third Robin. Before going into it, we really have Batman Year 3, which goes through the origin of Dick Grayson. So we reintroduce what his story is before introducing Jason. And I do have a vlog where I go all over this, but it's probably not the most put together thing, and especially if you like 20 minutes of me just talking about Robin as I look at the comics, which, you know, I love, but I mostly do because I adore and not because I know it's popular with other people. But this was just a really well done arc to really show why, and we have him introduction, we have the fact that he looks up to him and that he knows who he is, but he really has seen that Batman has become more violent and more aggressive, and he really wants to show a different side of him, and this is really what he wants. So he wants Robin, he wants Dick Grayson to become Robin again, and Robin is like, no, I'm a 20-year-old guy and I don't want to be a kid again. And the first thing that Batman chose me to do was to be a man and not a kid, so I won't be a kid. And we really see this, and we really see the aspect of him growing up and him not wanting it, but him being kind of being like, no, I think you'd be a good call for it because, you know, you care very much and you work out even though you're 13. Anyways, I really enjoyed this arc. If anyone is a Batman fan, please contact me because I love Batman. I'm starting Robin Year 1, and, like, I'm gonna go through his origin, and I really liked him. I love Dick, and I have a soft spot for Damian, and Jason as Red Hood. like him. So these are all characters that I really love, and I love learning more about Tim now. Now we have one last thing, and that is one other DNF, and I'm sorry, I DNF'd Queenie, and I really expected to love this, especially since I read her section in Girl, 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 which I thought was really well done, with her talking about how fame and how that means to the author and stuff like that. And probably this partly goes because I was not given trigger warnings going in. It begins with a miscarriage, and miscarriage is something that I'm really, really sensitive to, so it kind of put me in like this kind of not great headspace to begin with. And then it deals with like sexual violence, and it deals with a lot of other things, and it's dealt with kind of in more way in conversations with friends or normal people, where it's much more like the character isn't in touch with what's happening with their depression and stuff like that. But for me, it was just a little bit too much, and now it has a bad taste in my mouth, even though I know that's nothing to do with the actual author. But I don't know if I'm going to pick this up in the future, but for now I just DNF'd it. Anyways, those are the books that I read in April of 2021. Tell me what you read, what you thought about these books, all of these things. I look forward to hearing from you, and happy reading and writing, and I will see you next time. I like Dick, and I love Damien. I love Damien. That's a